I remember the first time I met James. It was at a mutual friend's party, one of those casual gatherings where people drift in and out of conversations, sipping on cheap wine and laughing about nothing. I wasn't expecting to meet anyone special that night, I had barely even wanted to go. But then, in the middle of all the noise, I noticed him. He wasn't the loudest person in the room. In fact, he was standing near the bookshelf, flipping through a novel as if he had all the time in the world. Something about that intrigued me. In a sea of people eager to impress, he seemed comfortable, at peace with himself. And that was attractive in a way I couldn't explain. We started talking, and it felt effortless. He had this quiet confidence, this ability to listen like my words actually mattered. I told him about my dreams of traveling, of finding meaning in the little things. He told me about his love for photography, how he liked capturing moments that would otherwise be forgotten. That night, we talked for hours. By the time I left, my heart was lighter than it had been in months. James was different from the guys I had dated before. There was no chase, no mind games. He was steady, reliable, the kind of man who made me feel safe just by being around. When he said he would call, he did. When he made plans, he followed through. And slowly, without even realizing it, I fell for him. Our relationship was easy in the best way. He would bring me coffee in the mornings before work, just the way I liked it, strong, with a hint of vanilla. On weekends, we'd stay in bed late, tangled up in each other, talking about nothing and everything. He would run his fingers through my hair as I told him about the places I wanted to visit, and he would smile, promising that one day, we'd go together. My friends adored him. "He's perfect for you," they would say. "He's exactly what you need." And they weren't wrong. James was everything a good man should be, kind, supportive, patient. He never raised his voice, never made me feel small. When I had a bad day, he would hold me until I felt better, whispering that everything would be okay. For a long time, I believed he was my forever. That we were building something unbreakable. But somewhere along the way, something inside me started to shift. It wasn't his fault. He didn't change. If anything, he stayed the same, steady, predictable, always there. But maybe that was the problem. I started craving something else, something undefined, something wild and uncertain. I wanted passion that felt like fire, like an unstoppable force. And James, for all his goodness, wasn't that. At first, I ignored the feeling. I told myself I was just overthinking, that love wasn't supposed to be a whirlwind all the time. But as the months passed, the feeling only grew stronger. I started pulling away, just a little at first, canceling plans, spending more time with my friends, keeping parts of myself separate from him. And the worst part? He noticed. "Is everything okay?" he asked me one night as we sat on the couch, his fingers lightly tracing patterns on my arm. "You seem distant." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, just stressed." He didn't push, didn't demand an answer. That was James, always giving me space, always trusting that I would come back to him. But deep down, I wasn't sure I would. And then, one night, I made the mistake that changed everything. It happened so quickly, I barely had time to realize the weight of the words I was about to say. We were sitting on the couch together, the soft glow of the lamp casting a warm light across the room. It was one of those quiet nights where the world outside felt miles away, and all that mattered was the space between us. James had just come back from a weekend trip with his friends, and as always, he was asking me about my week, about my plans for the future, about everything that seemed important to him. I appreciated that about him, he always cared about what I was thinking. But that night, something was off. Something inside me was restless, and I wasn't sure how to put it into words. James looked at me, his eyes searching for any hint of the truth behind my quiet demeanor. He had always been able to read me, and that was starting to feel like both a blessing and a curse. He smiled and asked, "What do you see for us in the future? What do you want?" The question hung in the air, heavy with expectations, as if he had already planned out our next 10 years in his head. I could see it in his eyes. He was waiting for an answer, for a sign that we were on the same path, that we were moving forward together. And that's when the thought hit me, like a spark that ignited a fire I wasn't ready to deal with. "I don't know," I replied, unsure of how to make sense of my own feelings. "I think I'm just tired of everything being so predictable. You know, like I want something more. Something different." James raised an eyebrow, his smile faltering. "What do you mean by different?" he asked, his voice now cautious, sensing the shift in the conversation. I knew I should have stopped there. I should have taken a breath, explained myself properly. But I didn't. Instead, the words spilled out of me, unfiltered and reckless. "You're not bad, James. I just prefer wilder men." The instant the words left my mouth, the room seemed to freeze. I could see his face fall, his eyes flickering with confusion and hurt. It was as though I had slapped him, even though my tone hadn't been harsh. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. And then he closed it, his expression hardening. "You prefer wilder men?" he repeated, his voice flat, like he was trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense at all. I immediately regretted what I'd said, but it was too late. I saw the hurt in his eyes, the way his body tensed. This wasn't something I could take back with an apology or a sweet smile. I had just broken something I couldn't fix with words. "I didn't mean it like that," I stammered, my heart racing as I tried to backpedal. "It's just... I don't know, I want more adventure. Something unexpected, maybe. Something that makes me feel alive." James stood up suddenly, pacing around the room. He didn't look angry, he looked disappointed. And that was worse. It was like I had let him down in a way that I could never repair. "You think you want more, but maybe what you really want is to run away from something that's good," he said, his voice low. "I give you everything, Lily. And you," he stopped, shaking his head. "You want excitement, not commitment. You want thrills, not stability." I opened my mouth to argue, but nothing came out. He was right, in a way. I had always wanted more, always been searching for something beyond what was right in front of me. But I hadn't thought about what that meant for him, for us. James ran his hand through his hair, a sigh escaping him. "I can't do this anymore. I thought we were building something. But if you can't even appreciate what we have, what's the point?" Before I could respond, he grabbed his jacket and walked out the door. Just like that, he was gone. And I was left sitting there, in the silence that followed, replaying the words I'd said over and over again in my mind. I tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I sent him a text, "Please, James. We can talk about this. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it." But nothing came back. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. And that silence was louder than anything I had ever heard. It felt like I had lost something that I could never get back. It wasn't just the relationship that was slipping away, it was the trust, the bond, the understanding we had built together. I had shattered it with a single thoughtless comment. And for the first time in my life, I truly understood what it meant to lose someone. The days after James left were unbearable. I woke up each morning with the weight of an empty bed beside me, the sheets still warm where he used to sleep. The silence in the apartment was deafening. I had never noticed how loud it was before, how every little noise felt like an echo of something that used to be. At first, I told myself that everything would be fine. He'd come back, right? He was just upset. We'd talk, I'd apologize, and we'd move past it. But as the hours turned into days, and the days into weeks, that hope started to fade. I found myself staring at my phone, willing it to ring. But it never did. There were no texts, no messages, not even a sign that he had read what I had sent. Each time I checked, the silence seemed to grow louder, more suffocating. I tried to stay busy, work, hanging out with friends, anything to fill the empty spaces. But it didn't work. It wasn't the same without him. Everything reminded me of James. The way the light would filter through the window in the mornings, casting a soft glow over the couch where we used to sit together. The way the air smelled after rain, like something fresh and new, like the beginning of a new chapter, one I had ruined. I missed him. And I missed the version of myself that was with him. Without him, I felt lost, like I was walking through life on autopilot, disconnected from everything around me. I spent so many nights crying, questioning why I'd said those words. Why hadn't I stopped myself? I kept thinking about that night, the way his face had fallen when I told him I preferred wilder men. How he had looked at me, not in anger, but in disbelief. I had broken something between us, something fragile and irreplaceable. And now, it seemed like there was no way to fix it. I thought about everything he had done for me. James wasn't the kind of man who made grand gestures, but he showed his love in the small things. He was the one who remembered every detail, how I liked my coffee, my favorite movies, the way I liked to spend Sundays. I had taken all of that for granted. I had convinced myself that I needed more, that I deserved more, but now I realized I had been wrong. I didn't need more. I needed him. But it wasn't just the loss of James that I had to come to terms with. It was the realization that I had done this to myself. I had been searching for excitement, for something to make me feel alive, and I had found it, only to realize that it wasn't what I truly wanted. I had hurt someone who only wanted to love me. The wildness I thought I craved had turned out to be a fantasy, something that had no real substance. It was like chasing a feeling that couldn't be captured, only to find emptiness at the end. There were moments when I wanted to call him, to tell him everything I was feeling. To explain that I didn't mean what I had said, that I was just scared of being too comfortable, too settled. But I couldn't. I had to face the truth, I had pushed him away, and no amount of words could undo that. I spent hours reflecting on what had gone wrong, replaying every conversation we'd had, every moment that led up to that night. I had thought I wanted adventure, but what I needed was stability. I had been foolish to think that chasing after something wild would make me happy. What had made me happy was the life we had built together, the quiet nights, the shared laughter, the way we understood each other without saying a word. And I had thrown it all away for a fleeting desire, a fantasy that no longer seemed worth it. The pain of realizing what I had lost was almost unbearable. It was like a constant ache in my chest, a reminder that I had made a mistake I couldn't undo. And yet, somewhere deep down, I knew I had to learn from this. I had to grow. I couldn't keep running from the comfort I had once craved. I had to learn how to appreciate what I had before it was gone forever. But as the days passed, the reality settled in. I wasn't just mourning the loss of James. I was mourning the loss of my own sense of self, of the person I had been when we were together, of the way I had felt loved, secure, and happy. And now, I was left with nothing but the remnants of a broken relationship and the painful realization that I had done this to myself. I woke up one morning to a message I wasn't expecting. It was from James. My heart skipped a beat when I saw his name on the screen. I hadn't heard from him in weeks, and honestly, I had started to believe I might never hear from him again. Maybe he was truly gone from my life, and this silence was the final goodbye. The message was simple, just a few words: "Can we meet?" I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. My hands shook as I typed a response, unsure of what to say. "Of course." "When?" Seconds later, he replied, "Tonight. I'll pick you up at 7. I barely had time to process the words before I felt the rush of emotions flood through me: relief, excitement, anxiety. Was this the moment I had been waiting for? The chance to fix everything? Or was this just a formality, a goodbye he felt obligated to give me? I spent the entire day preparing for our meeting, pacing around the apartment, overthinking every little detail. I wanted to look perfect, to somehow show him that I had changed, that I had learned from my mistakes. I couldn't let him think that I was still the same person who had pushed him away. When 7 p.m. finally came, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, heart racing. I was dressed casually, but with an edge, something that said I wasn't the same woman he had left behind. I needed to show him that I understood the mistake I had made, that I was ready to take responsibility for everything. The doorbell rang, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I opened the door to find James standing there, looking just as I remembered. His hair was a little longer, his expression a little more guarded, but there was still something familiar about the way he looked at me. "Hey," he said softly, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Hey," I replied, my voice a little shaky. He didn't say anything more. Instead, he stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. It wasn't the kind of hug I had expected, there was no anger or tension in it, but it wasn't completely warm either. It was like he was testing the waters, unsure of how much he could give. We got into his car, and as we drove, I could feel the weight of the silence between us. I wanted to speak, to say everything that had been on my mind, but I didn't know where to start. I had so many apologies to offer, so many things I wanted to explain, but I couldn't find the right words. We pulled up to a small, quiet cafe, one of those places I had always loved, but that James had never been particularly fond of. He parked the car and turned to me, his gaze serious now, his eyes searching my face as though trying to figure out what was going through my mind. "Lily, I've been thinking a lot about us," he began, his voice low. "About everything that happened. And I think we need to have a real conversation." My heart pounded in my chest. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment of truth. "I owe you an apology," I said, my voice steady despite the anxiety rising inside me. "I was selfish, James. I was looking for something. I don't even know what. But I pushed you away when all you ever did was love me. And I'm so sorry for that." James didn't respond right away. He just stared at me, his face unreadable. I could see the hurt in his eyes, the way he was still processing everything. He didn't look angry, but there was a distance there that I couldn't ignore. After a long pause, he spoke again. "I've been trying to figure out what I want too. And it's not easy, Lily. I don't know if I can just forget what happened. But," he paused, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a hint of vulnerability. "But I'm willing to try. To see if we can rebuild this. If we can find a way back to what we had." I blinked, trying to process his words. Was this really happening? Was he really willing to give us a chance again? "But it won't be the same," he added quietly. "We can't just pick up where we left off. Things have changed, and they have to stay changed. We both need to change." I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. I had hoped for a moment like this, but I hadn't dared to believe it would come. James was offering me something I didn't deserve, something I wasn't sure I had earned. But I was willing to try. I wanted to try. "I'll do whatever it takes," I whispered, my voice breaking slightly. "I don't want to lose you again, James." And in that moment, I knew that this wasn't just an opportunity to fix what had been broken between us. It was a chance for me to learn, to grow, and to become the person I was always meant to be, someone who could truly appreciate what she had before it slipped through her fingers. James took a deep breath, his hand reaching across the table to squeeze mine. "Let's see where this goes, then," he said softly. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could make it work. I never thought a joke could change everything. It started on a lazy Sunday afternoon, sitting with a group of friends at a small cafe. The conversation had drifted to past relationships, and we were all sharing stories, some funny, some painful. It was one of those moments where laughter felt easy, where memories of old wounds seemed distant, insignificant. And then, without thinking, I said it. "I guess you could say my ex still owns me," I laughed, shaking my head. The words left my mouth before I could even process them. It was meant to be a joke, something lighthearted, a way to brush off the past. But the moment I said it, I felt a shift in the air, a weight settling over me that hadn't been there before. I shouldn't have said it. Because somewhere, somehow, he heard it. That night, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I frowned, hesitating before answering. The second I picked up, my breath caught in my throat. Still owned by me, huh? The voice was unmistakable. Deep, smooth, with that unsettling calmness that had always put me on edge. I hadn't heard from him in nearly 2 years. I had convinced myself that part of my life was over, that he was gone for good. But he was never really gone, was he? I was joking, Ethan, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. It didn't mean anything. Oh, but it did, he murmured. You wouldn't have said it if it wasn't true. I swallowed hard. I could hear something in his tone, something dark, something that made my stomach twist. What do you want? I asked, already regretting picking up the call. Ethan chuckled, and it sent a shiver down my spine. Just catching up, darling. Reminding you that some things never really end. I hung up. And then the messages started. At first, they were simple. Little reminders of the past. Photos of places we had been together. A song we used to listen to. A single word, remember? Then, they got worse. A picture of my apartment building. A shot of me walking home. And then, one of me, sitting at the cafe that very afternoon. My blood turned to ice. He had been there. Watching. Listening. I wanted to believe this was just a coincidence, that he was playing games, trying to get into my head. But I knew better. Ethan never did anything without a reason. And if he was reaching out now, it meant he had a plan. I locked my doors. I told myself I was overreacting. That he was just trying to scare me. That he didn't actually have power over me anymore. But the truth? I had given it to him the moment I spoke his name into the universe again. The next night, my doorbell rang. My heart stopped. I moved slowly, peering through the peephole. And there he was. Standing on my doorstep, smiling like he had never left. I backed away, my breath coming in short gasps. My phone was in my hand, fingers trembling over the emergency dial. Open the door, love, he called through the wood. We have so much to talk about. And in that moment, I realized, this wasn't just a joke anymore. This was a mistake I might not be able to take back. Subscribe to our channel for powerful real stories that touch your heart. Join a community where emotions run deep and every story brings a new perspective. Don't miss out, hit that bell for weekly updates.